I didn't want to fit the top in. I wanted to fit the wording in. And the wording for me is the key thing. And I might even step a little bit over to the side. I've got another camera which is going to be looking like that. There's a feed that goes together which allows me to speak. And I could begin that way. But I'm likely going to be moving over in front of this other camera so that I can read directly from the passages. And this is very much what I wanted to put together for our book club, so you can see what's being read and comment. And we can see, especially today, just how different it all is. So we're going to read from chapter 3. I'm going to start things out, and I have the original, the first edition here, which is from 1973. And again, I've got the 1991 or 1992 edition here. And that is going to be very different. That's 4th edition, I believe. If you could boil this chapter in a frying pan and get it down to an essence, I think this idea of organization is wonderful. A system of lines as a sophisticated act of visual organization. Beautiful. Do you want to take on the same passage again from almost 20 years later? It's a completely different thing over here. This is where he is in the 4th edition. He got rid of this paragraph in the 4th edition. It doesn't exist. He struck it.
That's too bad.
It's too bad. This is a beautiful paragraph. This whole idea, why is this so important? Resolute and unflinching conviction. I mean, that is just great, because that's what you want people to have in your class. They just have this tenacity. They'll stop at nothing to get it. And then the idea of the simultaneously exciting and terrifying act of drawing, absolutely. Certainty, self-restraint, confidence. I mean, it's the best paragraph in the chapter. That's what I think, Josh, so far anyway. I'll begin here at the very bottom of the page, page 35 from 1973. A drawn line has certain given properties. It always has direction, interrupts or divides the picture plane, has a certain length, has along its course one or more values, and is consistent or varied in width or weight. Nice. Well said. It also has a personality or an attitudinal character, which is a phrase I think is awesome and is one of the reasons why this is a great book to read. You can see it's a perfect little phrase to work into, or to work this drawing into, better said, because you can see the Giacometti right above, which has tons of attitudinal character. Mainly derived from the artist's aesthetic and intuitive attitude to line in general, and his or her visual and expressive responses to a subject in particular. I think that's too wordy, and I think it's redundant, because if you're going to say attitude, again, in my opinion, you're going to dilute the attitudinal character, the key phrase of this, which is something which is very provocative to the practitioner to read. What is the attitudinal character of my line? And how do I work on this? How do I advance that as a concept and develop more of a personality or even like a cadence in what I do? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I struggled with that paragraph myself. So does he mean attitudinal character like gesture?
Well, this is an important thing. I believe that it's nice in this particular case to leave the phrase somehow undefined. Because what I would want someone to do if I was writing this is to be intrigued, to kind of pique their interest in that phrase, but not to necessarily spell it out. And therefore, I believe, as you're alluding to, that it could be applied to gesture. It could be applied to certain forms of contour, like one would think Holbein or Egon Schiele or Fashion, someone like that. But it may also be that you're looking to co-opt the phrase into some other thing. But whatever the case, I do love attitudinal character, and I don't love the rest of the sentence there. And so I want to hack away at that. If you don't mind, I'm going to do that. This is a lot of fun to go after this thing, because it also has a personality or an attitudinal character mainly derived, important, from the artist's intuitive approach to line. He had used the word aesthetic, so I'll use that word. An aesthetic responses to a subject in particular. Shall I try that? It also has a personality, quote unquote, or an attitudinal character in italics, mainly derived from the artist's intuitive approach to line and their aesthetic responses to a subject in particular. That is what I think he meant to say. Yeah. The medium and surface used also influence the attitudinal character. The artist using pen and ink will produce a very different kind of line than when he or she is used to compressed charcoal. The first, being a liquid medium, has none of the characteristics of the compressed charcoal, which is an abrasive medium. That's a good phrase, abrasive medium. But I think this is where he's trying to qualify what he means by attitudinal character, Karina. See chapter 7. Yeah. But I don't think the aqueous nature of something versus how dry or abrasive it is sufficient. That isn't going to give me as much of a fascination with that phrase as I want to. So far, I want to walk away from this with an abiding fascination with attitudinal character, with weight, with that resolute, unflinching resolve for the terrifying yet delicate act of drawing. And I want to understand that line can do many things. That's so far what I've got in summary, Susan. It, in turn, I guess line is it, cannot produce the precise and fluid qualities of ink. Well, I guess he's talking about charcoal. Papers with a pronounced surface texture do not permit as fast and free-flowing a line as do papers with slick, hard surfaces. Not only does the medium limit the character of the lines produced, I don't know if limit's the right word. I'm going to say specify. Not only does the medium specify the character of the lines produced, nature of the lines produced, it deflects the artist's lines onto certain tracks of usage, which influence their perceptions of the subject. Deflects. What?
That's a doozy one. We're
Yeah.
waiting for you on this.
Okay, yeah, I'm not liking deflects because that's pejorative. And this is, we're talking about something which does focus a certain kind of aesthetic approach. We think pen and ink, we think charcoal, we think about a certain way of working, don't we? All of us. But I don't think deflect is a good word for it. I don't know if I could think of something better off the top of my head than focus, specify. Not only does the medium, or media, you should pluralize that. Not only does the media specify or frame or something the character of the lines produce, it focuses the artist's lines. It drives their lines onto certain tracks of usage. I like that phrase. Which I would say manifest in the drawing. I don't know about this influence his perceptions of the subject. I don't know where he's going with that. It could be that you look at somebody like they're a charcoal drawing occasionally, but mainly, in a sense, you're pulling visual information and funneling it into a piece with a certain flair for its materiality. What do you guys think of that?
And that was like, it's almost like he's like combining lines from different media and then judges them.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency, maybe, I'm not quite sure in 1973 if this is the common practice, to categorize that a certain material was meant for a certain purpose. This was what had gone on in the earlier days of the A.W. Faber Company when they were designing pencils. The artists were using certain kinds of pencils and the architects were using other kinds of pencils. We find when we're looking at Mowbray that you drew this way in Mowbray's class. It was charcoal and crayon, that's how you did it. And maybe this is alluding to that take on materials and how they were utilized. Of course, today, and this has been going on for quite a few decades now, things are all over the map, all over the place. People are all over the place because we find it more fun to embrace the chaos of materiality. Does that make sense? The chaos of materiality?
Yeah, there's so much to play with.
There's a lot to play with. I think best I can assess, that's where he's going with some of this. Line can be used in two basic ways. All right, here goes. Descriptive and emotive. And this was the launch point, by the way, for Hatchmark, for the whole series. Diagrammatic lines and structural lines are descriptive in character. Calligraphic lines and expressive lines are emotive. This is such an important phrase in Goldstein's thesis and what he's trying to put together for his students and for posterity, that it's almost worth reading and rereading. And I'm going to do that exactly. He says diagrammatic lines, and you know those are lines that you'd create that are essentially like the anatomical plates that we talked about earlier today. Stuff like, in fact, I still have it here, diagrammatic lines. He's saying that diagrammatic and structural, and by structural, if you take a look at those Richer drawings that I annotated with gouache, those have these little thin lines in them. Those are your hatch marks, and those to him are descriptive in character. But if you turn your attention to the more expressive ones and the more calligraphic ones, those are emotive in nature. Their main driving force, according to him, is your emotion, your emotional response to things. Diagrammatic lines clarify the artist's impression of space, shape, volume, bad word right there, and direction. I even think space is a little weird. I'm going to cross them all out. Structural lines emphasize... Sorry.
What are you leaving there?
I'm not leaving much.
What if we say notional space?
I mean, this is a great question. I'm going to say formative decisions. The formative decisions in any drawing are the product of or the intention for diagrammatic lines. That's what I'm going to say. The formative, meaning the things that initiate, inaugurate, the perfunctory lines, the proposal marks, all that kind of stuff that I'm hugely into when I teach, because I want people to have a fluency and a breathability when they work. To me, that's the purview. And so things like shape and volume and space, they almost mean nothing. They're overused words, even though maybe I'm off my rocker to say what I'm saying. I just don't think they fit. That's why I crossed them out. And you know my issue with this one, and this probably makes the book club a torturous experience, but if you remember, I didn't use that word for the Hatchmark tutorial because the way that we see the word structure now is a totally different way than the way they're seeing it, the way he's seeing it in 1973. He is seeing the classic Hatchmark as structural. Where can I find that? This is a good example. The Michelangelo lines, to him, that's structural. That's going to make the experience of this session of the book club worth the entire cost of admission, because as soon as you recognize that that's what he means by structural, you can both see what he's talking about, but then you can appreciate that that word, in my opinion, in 2025 does not fit at all. That's a bad word there. And so I use the word volumetric. And I know it may be something that you could argue, but the volumetric mark making, such as what we see again in the Michelangelo, does something to, I'll say his phrase, clarify your appreciation of the form and space, the depth. And a structural line would probably be something much more diagrammatic, such as what we're doing in our drawings in the morning. This type of drawing here, that's structure today, that's structure in 2025, as I see it, as I'm proposing. This is my opinion, but this is part of the reason why these are such critically important and interesting, even fascinating conversations to have.
So basically, we're just giving him the word volumetric, and we crossed off space, shape, volume, and direction. In the next sentence, he has volumetric. He helps you in the next one.
Yeah, I just grabbed his word and I just canceled out structure. And so I think my words, again, were formative, initiating, perfunctory. I think those were the three words. Those are words that allude to a process, a creative process, but the nascent stages of a creative process. And to me, that's where diagrammatic flourishes. In most organic approaches to drawing, diagrammatic, there we go. And when we get to the other practices like we were talking about in structure, it's still diagrammatic, but it's more using this fascinating approach to drawing to clarify depth, navigate depth. And so that's how I see it. Lines of a strongly curvaceous and rhythmic quality, often more the result of dynamic rather than structural stimuli. How about that for a provocative statement? Are you getting that? Dynamic rather than structural stimuli, we should talk about that, are called calligraphic lines. So he has changed the definition a little bit, hasn't he? Do you have any idea what he's talking about?
So being emotional versus diving into structure?
Lines of a strongly curvaceous and rhythmic quality, often more the result, problematic phrase, of dynamic rather than structural stimuli, are called calligraphic lines.
So like the relationships, like the rhythms between the forms versus the construction of what he's seeing?
It may be, but I think the problem here, among many, is that, first of all, you're talking about the way things are interpreted, and you've got to be more open-minded than that. Because he says often the result of dynamic rather than structural stimuli. Who knows how somebody's going to draw something 50 years later, 100 years later? So that's an issue. The second problem, as I see it, is dynamic is an interesting word. Structural is already a word being used in his definitive categories of lines argument. And I think you got to protect that word, in my opinion. You've got to take that word and sequester it, isolate it, so that you can pick out a different thing. He might have said moving or fluid stimuli versus forms or subject matter that appears stoic, that appears immobile, or something like that. He could have said a million things, but he needs to dig a little bit more and specify, I think, in what he's trying to get at. I'll keep going. And some lines seem so charged with emotive energy that we regard their dominant role to be expressive. All lines, of course, are expressive, but some appear to issue more from an artist's intuition, empathy, and temperament than from either structural or organizational motives. I think he dilutes it by saying intuition, temperament, in my opinion. I think he would have done better just to say some lines are more full of empathy. And I think empathy is one of the best words that we're using these days in the mid-2020s to talk about drawing, because form empathy, it's really the handmaiden of structural drawing, to have this empathetic approach to form and the way form moves and, in a sense, acts or behaves. It's a beautiful word, and it doesn't need to be pulled, even though these are good words too. But, the intuition thing is more complicated, because what you're trying to do when you teach somebody with stuff like this is get this into their conscious thought for a while, allow them to think about it for a period of time, and then it sinks or slips into their intuition, and then they've got something special that their temperament is going to deal with to reflect their personality.